I had my laptop ready and I was recording with a friend of mine, microphone here. I had my glass of water there because my mouth gets really dry. My arm accidentally hit my glass of water. My laptop was just like flooded.
No.
Like all the water went straight on my laptop and I was like, oh.
What I noticed when I was looking at business podcast landscape, Diary of a CEO, My First Million, Gary V audio experience, and they all happen to be hosted by guys. Look at female hosted shows. They're called things like SheEO, Girls Tech Charge, Women in Web3. Like suddenly all the artwork is pinkish. I don't want to be reduced down to my gender.
Most entrepreneurs don't make that much money in the first 2 years. So that's the statistics, but TikTok doesn't tell you that. Instagram Reels doesn't tell you that.
Yeah.
I don't believe the message that they're giving. I think it's a toxic message.
Thank you so much for clicking on this episode of The Millennial Entrepreneur. The ambition of the podcast is to share relatable stories from young entrepreneurs doing some incredible things to inspire the next generation, including you listening wherever you are. We've been doing this podcast for over 3 years and the ambition has not changed. The only thing that has changed is the scale of where we want to go. We want to bring on bigger guests for you guys to show more and more relatable stories from young entrepreneurs across the world. The majority of you guys watching or listening haven't subscribed to the podcast yet. All you have to do is click that subscribe button wherever you're listening. Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and that will allow us to bring on bigger guests and ask the questions that you really want to hear. And it really is that simple. My name is Sina Sadzadeh. Thank you so much for clicking on the podcast and enjoy the episode.
Welcome to this special crossover episode of
The Millennial Entrepreneur.
And Strategy and Tragedy.
My name's Sina.
And I'm Stephanie Melodia.
I guess the reason why we wanted to do this episode in the first place is cool crossover episode is because, I've been podcasting for 4 years. So it's literally this month as well, April I started. And I started during COVID, fully recording remotely. And I really wanted to do this sort of episode to reintroduce why I'm podcasting. Because I'm recording now, but I want this to would be the first episode that I'm recording that I'll be putting out there. So yeah, it's a surreal thing doing it for that long, but I guess the real reason is I want to reintroduce what I'm doing.
Fantastic.
Why did you want to do this episode?
A really fun crossover, basically. I think it's just such a treat to be able to speak kind of podcast host to podcast host. I want to give the audience something a bit different as well, see what they think. And I think it's always just fun for people to get a bit of an insight as to what goes on behind closed doors. We're the ones who get to interview the guest. We're at the epicenter of all these of all these, stories. You, of course, have been doing it for so much longer. So we're so privileged in terms of all of the stories, all of the guests and things that we've spoken to. So I think it's just going to be really fun to dissect what we've been doing so far.
I also want to ask you some difficult questions,
nice.
About
bring it on,
worst guest experience, best guest experience, stuff like that. Because you've been doing it you had 25, 30 episodes now?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's enough time to get a good cross section of what podcasting is like.
And that's a really excellent one. I cannot wait to get stuck into the juice.
I guess
of this.
First thing, why did you start podcasting in the first place?
Yeah. All right, cool. So we'll tease the audience before we get into the meaty stuff, shall we? So I used to run my own business, which was a marketing agency, for about 6 years up until last summer. And during the 6-ish years of running the agency, we counted that we had worked with over 100 founders and their scaling teams during that time. And not only is it, that kind of 3-digit number in terms of clients, but of course, the amount of other people that, we spoke to in the network. I'm also a VC scout for Ada Ventures. I wear a couple of different hats. I'm just, a bit of a networker as well. So all of that is essentially to say that I was also very privileged to be at the epicenter, again, of all of these founders, all of their experiences, all their trials and tribulations. But of course, not being publicized and me being the one hearing everything and at the epicenter of all these different stories and struggles was like, oh my God, you have no idea that so-and-so is also going through the same thing.
Yeah.
Or I would always connect them and always try and do what I did, do what I could to help anyway. And honestly, I think I'm really, really curious. I think there's a bit of an unfulfilled childhood dream of, being on TV, being a host. So wanted to create that for myself as well. I want to do more public speaking. So all of that, has combined to to lead me to creating the show. How about you, Sina?
Yeah, it's a funny one because I wanted to just like ask you questions based on your answer.
I know, we're both hosts.
Yeah, I know.
And like, we both want to interview each other.
The reason why I started is because, so I was at university, I hosted a lot of, I was vice president of the Entrepreneurship Society, and I hosted a lot of events there, basically inviting alumni to come in and do talks around starting businesses and stuff like that. And I always found that the ones where the business owner was an actual alumni, like a recent alumni, that really resonated far more than someone that, even though they were more successful, but they were a bit older and maybe a bit more further along in their journey, that didn't resonate as much with our audience. And I felt, after I graduated and then COVID hit, I was a bit bored really, and I wanted to have a hobby where I could kind of do what I was doing before, but in a more scalable way, if that makes sense. And I felt like I was looking around and there weren't really any podcasts that focused on younger business people. Loads of podcasts out there that, they do amazing work, Stephen Bartlett's podcast or High Performance, and a lot of other podcasts out there that exist. They interview business owners that have made their millions during like the early stages of the internet, for instance. And a lot of them are like middle-aged white men. Let's not beat around the bush. And like for me, I felt like their stories weren't relatable to the young entrepreneurs of today. And that's why I wanted to, shine a light on the young entrepreneurs doing some amazing work to inspire the next generation.
Yeah.
And so that's one reason. And also there's the vanity reason around like, I wanted to actually learn from these people and meet these people and create sort of like a community myself, because I have a business on the side too. And I did a few episodes at the beginning. My first ever episode, actually, this is how far the podcast has matured. My first ever episode, I had my laptop ready and I was recording with a friend of mine. His name was Ayush, actually, and he messaged me recently wanting to come back on. But he had an app around like alternatives for vegetarians, and really cool guy. Anyway, I like sat down to record with him, had my microphone here, and I didn't really have like the right equipment, so like there was just like loads of books stood up, like because I'd never a microphone stand. I wanted to have everything on a budget. Like I was unemployed at this stage. I had my glass of water there because my mouth gets really dry. And I was just like fumbling around. Anyway, my arm accidentally hit my glass of water. My laptop was just like flooded. No. Like all the water went straight on my laptop. And I was like, oh, fuck. I mean, it's my podcast. I can do what I want. I was like,
it's fuck, our podcast, Sina.
I was like, this is so bad. Like, and my laptop literally like switched off straight away. Fuck. And I messaged Ayush being like, yeah, sorry, I can't record with you today. Like my laptop's like fucked. So no. I put it under a hairdryer, which you're not apparently meant to do, but I did it anyway because I didn't know what I was like panicked. And luckily after a few days it switch back on, and it stuck with me for the next sort of 2 years. So,
wow. Okay, what's the brand? We need to plug the brand of this laptop.
I'm not plugging Apple, but yeah.
They don't need any more help.
Yeah, so that's basically...
That's amazing though.
Yeah, so if any podcasters are listening, that's how I started with like a £50 mic and a load of books as a microphone stand.
Do you know what though? I think I can go, not that it's a competition or anything, but I think I can go one worse than you really? On that one. So I launched this podcast officially back in September. So it has been a little while, nowhere near as long as you obviously. And like all out here, like with the studio, high production quality. And, but this isn't my first foray into podcasting. My first podcast was back in 2018-ish, I think, I want to say, so a few years ago. And I took my phone. So it was called Time to Bloom. So the name was shit as well anyway. The cover artwork was disgusting. So again, you saying about like how far we've come. It's always good to look back and be ashamed of like what you did, because it shows that you've come a long way. I took my phone, iPhone, Apple again. I took my phone into people's offices and just recorded. And just recorded on voice notes our conversation. And obviously it wasn't videoed, but it was just the audio of the conversation. I'd put that out as a podcast, and I only managed to get like about 4 episodes into it. So I didn't take it as seriously as I am now, but it's funny thinking back to those early days, isn't it?
But like when you were doing those voice notes, like what made you want to upgraded from like then to this? Like, what was the light switch in your head?
That actually is a fantastic question, Sina. Don't you love it when guests tell you that you've asked a great question? Oh, yeah, great. I know that you're just buying yourself time for the answer, but thank you. That's a good question. So I started that, put the time to bloom. Do you know, I think it was actually, I don't think it was 2018. I think it was 2019. And the reason I say that is because I was fully intending on doing a season 2, lo and behold, in 2020. And obviously we all know what happened. And it's funny actually that was the start of it for you in 2020. For me, it was the pause. It was the opposite. It was the delay, because I was like, I don't know, I like doing it in person. It's just the energy, the quality. I just much prefer doing it in person. So actually 2020 gave me time to step back. It put the brakes on me, which is always a healthy thing for somebody like me. I'll just go. So someone else kind of needs, or something else needs to put the brakes on. And that's what 2020 did for me. So it just kind of forced me to pause. And during that time, I just got naturally, again, we're all at home and we weren't out and about as much. So I very naturally just listened to more and more podcasts. And I think that was probably when I did get really into Diary of a CEO, and I listened to every new episode. And so I was just like, I could do this. I would love to do this. And it's funny you mentioning some of those other shows, like Diary of a CEO, High Performance Podcast, all of those other shows, because I then did a little bit more research, and there was this really annoying discovery. You saying that millennial entrepreneur, for you've got more of kind of the age niche, which makes perfect sense because we've been born into a different era. It's more relatable. I totally get that. It makes perfect sense. What I noticed when I was looking at the business podcast landscape is that you have these shows like Diary of a CEO, My First Million, High Performance Podcast, the Gary V audio experience, blah, 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 blah. And they all happen to be hosted by guys, right? Mm-hmm. And then as soon as you start to look at female hosted shows, they're gendered. So for example, whether it's the name, the artwork, or both, they're called things like CEO, Girls Tech Charge, To All My Sisters,
Women in Web3.
Women in Web3, like suddenly, or the artwork is pinkish or lilac or whatever. And, I'm not ashamed of being a woman or anything at all, but I do have very strong views on gender equality and feminism, which we won't talk about today. But for me, it's too reductionist. I don't want to be reduced down to my gender. And so that was a really big ambition of mine, and still is with the show. I want it to be successful in its own right, that just so happens to be hosted by a woman. So that's where like the name, the title, Strategy and Tragedy has got nothing to do with women. It's not gendered. The artwork is black and white. So I want to be operating, and this is kind of my approach in business as well. I want to be operating on that side of the playing field and being taken seriously in that meritocratic way. It's very nuanced, because it's like, well, you kind of have to work harder as a woman and all the rest of it. But like, I just don't. And with my guests, the last thing I'll just very quickly share is that diversity has followed through in the guests on the show. And I hope listeners have hopefully realized this, is I interview Black men, brown women, white women, Black, like all ages, races, genders, but without making that a thing either. Like I won't be like, oh, here's my next female founder guest or my new Black guest. Like it's just they're on the show for who they are. But behind the scenes, I'm still prioritizing as much as I can, hopefully, the diversity. But
I guess you don't ask them specific questions that are like they're about their gender, about their race, about anything like that?
Sometimes it does. Yeah. So for example, Emmy Faust, which happens to be my most popular podcast episode, so I want to ask you what yours is in a second as well, but not very, she's amazing, but surprisingly that's been the most popular episode, and her business is called Female Founders Rise, and her angel investment thesis is purely to back women. So naturally, there is more of a conversation with the gender piece is then kind of pushed up in the agenda. And then there have been others that's more about, you know, the challenges that they've maybe faced as a minority. So it's also, it is a very tricky subject because you also don't want to like fully ignore those factors because they are real challenges or privileges. That's the other thing that I'll also say. On the flip side, I also ask the upper class, well-educated white men on my show if they're aware of the privileges that have helped set them up for success, which can be a bit of an uncomfortable like conversation. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, my sort of thought process on this, it was like, well, if I want to inspire the next generation, I have to get sort of every branch of what an entrepreneur looks like. Yeah. Right. And like, but that's my thought process was that going into it. And so I did make a conscious effort of representing sort of everyone and any sort of shape or form an entrepreneur can take. But honestly, like just from my experience going forward, I haven't had to try that hard. Like genuinely, I haven't had to try hard at all. I've had people come to me, you know, black founders, female founders of color. Like I've had pretty much every shade. And like honestly, my audience as well. If you look at the data, the only like I think gender data you can get really that makes sense is probably Instagram, because YouTube, some people just don't reveal their gender on YouTube, and so it's not as the data's not as good. But anyway. And so if you look at my Instagram, it's like pretty much 50-50. If anything, I think women might have 5% more than men that follow my Instagram page, which
that makes sense.
And like, and honestly, like guest wise, it's pretty much 50-50 as well. But genuinely, I've not tried to make it like that. It's just the way it's happened. It's
kind
the
of the
filter that's come
opposite for
through.
me. I don't know if I should admit that because I don't know what it means or what it says about, I don't know, like my network, but I actually have to make a conscious effort. I do get one particular demographic profile. I'm spoiled for choice, and I do sometimes have to like purposely go out and find other profiles. So it's interesting. So most popular episode of yours?
My two most popular episodes are both women.
So interesting. Funny with mine as well. Is that coincidence?
So I don't know. I've never really thought about it, but yeah. So my first most popular episode is with a friend of mine, Laura Costa, who's I've been friends with her for a long time.
She's got a huge following.
Yeah, she's like really blown up recently. Yeah. And she works incredibly hard. Like I've been friends with her for a long time, and like she's been working very hard to gain this following. Like it's definitely not out the blue. Like she's been working very hard behind the scenes. And the second one, I believe right now is Maya Richora, who
I knew you'd say her. I knew it.
Yeah,
you'd asked me to guess. I would have said
everyone
Maya.
Everyone knows Maya these days. She's cool because Maya and I went to university together.
Ah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we went to university together, and
in Bristol, right?
In Bristol, yeah. So she was, I think, the year below me or the same year.
That's amazing.
She had a podcast herself that not many people know about, but she had a podcast herself with a friend of hers. And she messaged me when I first started, I'm pretty sure, being like, can you give me some advice around like starting a podcast, growing a podcast, stuff like that? And we had a call, we got on, and
she's amazing.
And then just all of a sudden she just like blew up. It was crazy.
Blown up
and
as well, yeah.
She's been, I love her messaging. I love like what she's doing. It's extremely positive. And she's actually been someone that I've been trying to get on for a while, because when she blew up really fast. It was like out the blue. And her messaging is very sort of, it's very precise. Like
I was going to say.
She knows what she's talking about, but
really
it's like that one very niche topic.
Yeah.
Which I guess is why it connects so well.
Yeah.
And I was trying very hard to get her on. And eventually, she came on, which is good. But my third most watched is a friend of mine called Ian. And he lived in Kenya. He was a childhood actor. And then he like left his life to become a monk. And yeah, he's got some views that and about like the self and spirituality and stuff like that you would never think of. And that episode, even though it's maybe the third most watched, is the one that maybe gets the most sort of residual views because people come back to it, and the retention rate on that is like very high as well because people just really like listening to him. Really,
yeah, I can imagine. And it's really interesting with those top two episodes of yours, because I was just wondering about how much their own following respectively, so Lara and Maya, they've both got such huge profiles, such huge following, just that automatically by default would make, because they've just got the higher reach, versus not to undermine them whatsoever, because I think they're both phenomenal, but like versus the actual subject matter, the content, which perhaps maybe comes through more in the episode with Ian, right? It's just the same with business. It's like the analogy with business is if you throw enough money at it, if you've got enough venture capital investment, then like obviously your chance of being a success are higher versus
but like, I guess they have built an audience, and they built an audience because people like their message, right?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Like Lara, for instance, I'm pretty sure I was her first or second podcast she ever went on, so it was one of the early ones. And she was actually the first person I had in my studio in Brixton. In actual fact, like if you do listen to that episode, there are a few sort of hiccups in terms of the microphones and stuff. Just be like, we only just like recorded there for the first time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we've been friends with her for a while. But what I found interesting is that it wasn't the whole, because those three, they don't talk about like making a ton of money. They don't talk about like another reason why I like having this podcast as an asset really is like there's so much toxic information out there when it comes to young people and entrepreneurship. It's become like, I guess, think about how rock stars were thought of before.
Totally.
It's honestly turned into what entrepreneurs are now.
Yeah.
People see, and where do people get this inspiration from? Like young people get this inspiration from TikTok, Instagram Reels, all this short form content from people that might not even be business owners or entrepreneurs, and they're showing like a day in the life and all this type of thing, and they're showing the absolute best parts of entrepreneurship that
it's the highlight show reel.
Highlight show reel. It might be exaggerated, they might just flat out be lying, they might be trying to sell you their course and stuff like that. So it's very disingenuous, but those are the ones that get the most views. Those are the ones that go the most viral because they're the most sort of extreme. And so young people now grow up thinking, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I know I'll get rich really fast.
They get lured
but in actual
in for
fact,
the wrong...
like most entrepreneurs don't make that much money in the first like 2 years or 3 years,
for sure.
if it's all. Like most businesses fail, right? That's the statistics. But TikTok doesn't tell you that. Instagram Reels doesn't tell you that.
Yeah, you're
so
totally right.
A huge reason as well why I want to have this podcast space, and have turned down a ton of guests that, even though they have a huge following that I know would probably come through to my video, is because I don't believe the message that they're giving. I think it's a toxic message.
So how do you turn them down? I guess you don't say that to them.
I just say it's the wrong fit, or I'm already pretty much oversubscribed and stuff like that. Or I'll keep you in mind for future episodes. And I do sometimes, like if I'm sort of on the fence with it, I do sort of like follow their content for a while and see sort of if I think it's a good, because like even though my platform isn't massive, and their platform in a lot of instances might even be bigger than mine, I don't feel comfortable sort of sharing their message if I feel like it will actually do more harm than good. And it's a decision that I make. So yeah, I don't know if you've ever had to turn down guests because of that reason as well.
Yeah, similar. Yeah, but I was gonna ask you on the. It's just left my brain there for a second. Sorry, I was caught off guard with that question because I was thinking of something else there with you. I was going to ask you something else, and it just completely pushed it out of my mind. Sorry, because I was going to ask you a question.
Your ideal like guest profile. That's probably a better way of asking the question.
As you guys know, this podcast is focused on entrepreneurship. So you guys are probably making things happen as an entrepreneur or just starting out. But my question to you is, are you getting enough support to actually lead to your business thriving? If not, you definitely need to join the Federation of Small Businesses. FSB membership gives you access to all those essential documents, toolkits, and resources to help your business operate, as well as a 24/7 legal helpline. There's also essential business cover and many more discounted business essential products and services. There's also a ton of events every month, both online and in person, for you to network with other small business owners across the UK. I speak from experience. Being an entrepreneur is amazing, but it can be pretty lonely at times. As part of FSB, you'll gain more than just your membership. You'll be part of a community that supports you. So if you want to find out more, visit the link in the description. Thanks so much, and let's go on with the rest of the episode.
Just Before I answer that, I just completely agree. I've got the exact same mission, and I'm really glad that you brought that back up again, because I forgot to cover that in the intro earlier on, because, you know, the title of the show, Strategy and Tragedy, for a reason. It's completely that. It's I talk about it in episode 0, actually. Just, it's like 6 minutes long, so 3 minutes at double speed if anyone wants to just kind of catch up on that one. But yeah, I just completely agree with everything you just said there, and especially just seeing it from the inside. You know, I said I run my own agency, working directly with these startup founders, with these entrepreneurs. They get lured in for the wrong reasons, and they're motivated for, you know, their heart's not in the right place with it. It's just like, you're not going to succeed with that. But to answer your question on the guests to turn down, I don't think, you know, I'm not as far along with it as you are. There are some where I'm just like, oh, I'm not quite sure, but I don't know. I don't think it's been as much of a problem. What have been the biggest like commonalities for you, having done so many more episodes? You've done, was it like 140 now?
Like, yeah, almost 140.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's insane.
I kind of lost, because I used to number them. I don't number them anymore. It's just like better for SEO, but like I don't number them anymore. And I think it's around 140.
Okay, so with such a huge library of episodes, what are like the top 1 to 3 themes that kind of come up time and time again in your
That's a really good question. I don't know if you call this a theme, but like honesty around like building, and around sort of sacrifices. Because again, that's not shown in the regular channels that people interact with when it comes to entrepreneurship. And then, I don't know, I have to think about it in terms of common themes.
Because for me, like, it really jumped out. And I think it links back to what I was just saying before about with the diversity of the guests. So like, despite interviewing people of different backgrounds, ages, races, for me, it really jumped out. Maybe it's easier because I've not got as many episodes under my belt.
Yeah.
But after doing, you know, like 3, 5, 10, 20, oh my God, the same stuff comes over. For me, for example, like one of the biggest common themes has been the appreciation for founder self-care through entrepreneurship.
I agree.
That's been like repeat again, whether you're a man or woman, whatever gender, race, that's been like, that was like a big lesson. Like I should have taken better care of myself instead of just like running on fumes.
It's a strange one though, because you really do meet so many different sort of founders, because some founders say the whole, like, I guess promoting the whole grind culture of, you know, you need to work extremely hard, like crazy hours, and that's the kind of way to succeed.
Have you heard anyone say it? Because I feel like other people say it, but no one actually does. Everyone knows it's wrong.
I have had some people say it, but as I said before, like I have turned people down because I don't agree with the message that they're saying. But then you get on the other hand of like just not promoting grind culture at all. But it's a strange one, because I'm ambitious myself. I do work hard, but it's like, what's the line between like grinding very, very hard and sort of sacrifice? Because there is a level of sacrifice, even if you do work hard. But it's like, what is the line? And it's difficult for me, because I'm like, well, yes, the decision that I make for myself is myself, but you and I, we have some sort of a platform, and it's like, what are we trying to promote here?
It's totally personal and subjective, isn't it? What I found is a lot of people, myself included, a lot of my guests, unfortunately, have had to discover where that line is the hard way.
Yeah.
And so like, I've been through burnout twice. I've had founders on the show who've been through much worse, who've either like developed a new illness or, you know, disease, like long-term sort of problem, or like chronic illness off the back of like what they put themselves through, or similar. And it's like, it's not that it's too late, but it's kind of like, you've been there, you got your fingers burnt. It's like, you know, you can tell a child that flame is going to hurt, don't put your fingers in it, but until you do, you're, ouch, okay. Sometimes you have to do that to kind of learn from it. What I would just say on this interesting topic though, is the more dangerous aspect is tying your identity to your self-worth, to your productivity. And I think especially as a founder, like, it's bad enough if you're already hardworking, conscientious, and you've got a good work ethic when you're when you're employed, when you're working, a standard job, if you like. But when it is your own company, it does become so intertwined with your own identity. And so therefore it becomes even harder to divorce the two, if that makes sense. So I think that's something that's a message that I would just want to share here is the success of your business is also dependent on factors that are out of your control. As the saying goes, you're better off being a good company in a great market versus a great company in a bad market. And I think especially now in the past 18 to 24 months, we've been through like a lot of turmoil in terms of the wider, macroeconomic climate. And so there's just it doesn't matter how hard you work, there's some stuff that, the odds are stacked against you. And, going through the rejection, the failure, however you categorize that, it is all lessons. It is thickening up your skin. It is resilience. The main thing, it's such a cliche, but it is picking yourself back up again and going back for it. So, yeah.
What's been your top three? You didn't answer that question.
The top one was with Emmy Faust. And what's interesting actually is, I was going to ask you a similar question here, is my podcast, I'm really curious to ask you about this as well. My podcast performs so differently on different channels.
Yeah.
So the pure podcast in terms of like episodes and listens and downloads is Emmy Faust. I can't remember the exact number. It might be 22. But then on YouTube, it's with a guest called Anu Obe. If I put any clip of her, it's like,
really?
it does well. Yeah, exactly.
Crazy.
And then YouTube, I feel like YouTube is a bit skewed because I do the collaborator posts. So if they just have a good foot, then like automatically it's going to get a higher one. And then like LinkedIn is something different. TikTok is something different. So yeah, it's really weird. Does the same happen for you, or is it just universal?
That's a good point. I mean, honestly, I've stopped looking at like Spotify, Apple Podcast stats.
Oh,
like,
that's healthy.
Genuinely.
That's good. Yeah.
Because I kept refreshing it, but also like I would see that I was sort of charting in a certain country on Apple Podcasts.
Wow.
Well, like, yeah, it happens. And then I would go on like Apple Podcasts, or I go on like wherever I get my stats from, and they would say like, oh, you've got no listeners in this country. And it's like, well, like a few listeners in this country. I'm like, well, it's something that doesn't add up here because I'm like above certain podcasts. I know they're getting really good views, but then you go onto YouTube and like YouTube's got far better stats than like the podcast platforms do. So I'm putting all my sort of concentration right now on growing the YouTube now because
and better for monetization as well, I think.
Yeah, it's also better for the discovery too, because like if you put loads of effort into Spotify and Apple Podcasts, they'll never promote your stuff. Yeah. Whereas YouTube, if the retention rate's high or whatever, then it will get pushed out to more people.
Yeah. They're more supportive of creators, aren't they? Yeah.
So that's why I'm trying really hard to push the YouTube, because I feel like I've sort of reached the limit almost when it comes to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Like because I feel like podcasting is kind of broken in that sense, because other platforms, like they promote it for you, but Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the podcast platforms, you have to kind of do it on Instagram, or you have to do it on TikTok. You have to do it on a separate platform for people to go onto your audio platforms.
Yeah, you're totally right.
That doesn't exist anywhere else.
No, you totally hit the nail on the head.
It's kind of like, I don't know, if you had like a Facebook ad, for instance. Yeah. And but you couldn't press the link to go to the product. You have to like type it in yourself onto Google. That's almost what it's like. So you get pushed it, but it's like, yeah. So I think it's a bit broken in that sense.
Yeah. And just on the stats, just to quickly say, so before I forget, it links back to that self-worth piece I was talking about more with the entrepreneurial guest, but also for us, like I think it's really easy, no matter what you do, what field you're in, there's a dashboard, there's analytics, there's data for anything, whether it's your Instagram followers or your listeners on your podcast. And so that is also, a black and white number that also makes it really tough mentally to, again, not tie your self-worth to that, to be like, oh shit, this has only had 5 listens or whatever. Yeah. I'm obviously a failure, Let me ask you a question about that. So a lot of people start a podcast, and your reason for starting a podcast was completely valid and very good. A lot of people have amazing reasons for starting, but
not many people carry them on. So like most people get to episode 10. I think the stat is like 80 or 90% get to episode 10, then just like fall off.
I read that too. Yeah.
Yeah. But you've gone past episode 10 now. You've gone to like 25, 30 and you're definitely going to carry on. So you said the motivation for starting, but what was the motivation for actually carrying on?
It's another great question. Just, I guess it's just the enjoyment, like the personal fulfillment, and similar to what you were saying before with having the luxury of getting to meet such a diversity of people and their stories. It's kind of like a research project as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I get to do these like one-on-one qualitative interviews with guests to keep kind of feeding that research piece. Bigger question for you though, obviously the fact that you've gone so much further than 20, 30 episodes. How have you, I guess not what's kept you going, although I'd love to hear that as well, but more how have you stayed motivated throughout that longer period of time?
I haven't said this to many people, but like there was a point where I just like wants to stop. Like I kind of fell out of love with it. And I mean, there's a few reasons around it. I won't get into it too much, but basically, it wasn't too personal that happened. It happened but I just kind of fell out of love with it and felt like my priorities sort of shifted to something else. And so I was still recording, but I could sort of feel myself like not really enjoying it as much as I used to. This is around sort of episode 50 or something. So I was like, well, I've been doing it for so long. Also, I was still recording virtually, so I wasn't doing much video, and the video quality like wasn't that great anyway because it's virtual. And like the YouTube, I hadn't started the YouTube yet, so it was all on the audio platforms. The viewership was like it went up and down. But it wasn't, the general trend wasn't going up. The general trend was just like this, and like some weeks would be better than others, but it would all sort of be really like the trend was like basically flat. So I was like, well, I'm not growing. I'm not enjoying it that much anymore myself. So it's like, why carry on? And that's when I saw sort of more clips happening and just more stuff happening in terms of the visual aspect. So like videos. I was like, well, maybe in order to succeed, I have to do that. And I started having like more conversations around just things that I want to talk about. So more sort of founder happiness. So instead of asking around like, oh, how did you raise your funding round and stuff like that, which I still do ask, but it was more around like, how do you stay motivated and stay happy as a founder? And how do you balance, say, like relationships with being a founder and stuff like that, which I felt like was very relevant. That's when I sort of started finding my voice a bit more and started finding my enjoyment more. And then I started putting more clips out there, and then obviously got a studio in Brixton and started recording them like video. That's when the growth also started picking up. So yeah, it took me like maybe 60, 70 episodes before I started actually gaining an audience. Obviously for you come at it from, this is maybe your second time doing this podcast, like a podcast in general. So you come at it with that sort of lesson where, I mean, if I was to start a new podcast now, I have like zero doubt in my mind that it will grow because I know how to do it now. First time I didn't really know what I was doing. So yeah, it was difficult at the beginning and the middle. But now I'm just like, if I'm not doing this, I don't really like know what else I'd be doing, you know? Because I do enjoy it a lot, and meeting, you know, other young founders that are doing some amazing things.
Yeah, nice. I love that. And what I would just, my comments off the back of that is, I think it's so natural to be demotivated when you have to have some sort of reward for the effort that you're putting in, just like for any, I know it sounds so obvious, but especially, you know, we're talking about whether it's podcasting or entrepreneurship, there is only so long, you know, I know resilience is a buzzword, but it's like, yeah, but until when? Like, we've all got our own reserves. It's a very, very human thing to run out of steam, whether it's physical, whether it's just motivation. So if you're not getting some sort of reward, again, you know, without tying your self-worth to the metrics and everything, but you've got to see some sort of upwards trajectory, whether it is in the community that you're cultivating or the caliber of the guests that you're interviewing. So I want to say that first and foremost. And secondly, kudos to you for kind of pulling yourself through, but doing it in a way that revisits your personal motivations, what actually is going to keep you interested to keep going. So it's highly commendable that you're now like 150, you've got past the 100 mark. But like, that's amazing.
But Stephanie as well, like, another thing is like, that's when my audience started growing as well, because I felt like once I found my voice and once I sort of start asking the questions where, you know what, I'm just genuinely interested in asking this. So rather than being like, this is what
you feel like you should ask.
This is what this podcast host would ask. This is what this it's like, what would I actually ask as a person?
I've done this so much, and this actually makes me think of another. I've got so many questions to ask you, but I know we don't have lots of time, so let's try and squeeze as much as we can. But you've just made me think. I just laugh so much with you saying that, because I have interviewers that I really admire and look up to, and I want to ask you who you do as well, but I'll just quickly share. So I look up to I've got a few kind of eccentric, eclectic inspirations. So Sean Evans of the Hot Wing Challenge, I really respect him and his interview style, and I think it's really impressive. Just the style, how much research out there. I love it, and it's so funny you say that, because like sometimes I will listen to an interview of his and I'll sort of get into that sort of headspace and try and ask a similar sort of question, and I'll fail. At least for me, I'm like, oh, I didn't. And you're so right touching on that, because I'm sure no one else notices, but like in my mind, I'm thinking like, oh, I want to take a Sean Evans style here, or who else do I admire? I don't know. There's a list of loads of others, but like, who do you look up to?
No, he's really good. I do like his style, but I think as well, another cool thing that I've seen is that interview styles have evolved so much. Like before, it was it had to be very professional. It had to be someone with very professional, like a very professional demeanor, very good questions, not even in-depth questions as well. It's like normally quite surface level questions. And if you look at like newspapers and magazines, they still ask these sort of questions.
Yeah.
That's the old form of media. Or like, or like sports journalists as well, because they just ask like, oh, what did you think about the game or whatever. It's just very surface level stuff. Yeah. But I mean, they don't have a ton of time, and celebrities, football players, they can be a bit hot-headed sometimes. So I get it. But as kind of stuff's evolved and new mediums have come up, you get like Amelia de Moldenberg, who like is very awkward. That's her sort of interview style, but it's like that resonates with so many people. And you get your guy as well. Like it's very good as well. One that I really like is Jake Humphries from High Performance. I think he's like very underrated, because although he worked for Sky and or like BT Sport, like worked for like as a broadcaster for a long time. I like how he can sort of take different questions, like sometimes surface level, sometimes like very deep, but I always kind of find myself thinking, that's exactly what I would ask. Like that's exactly what I'm thinking. So when he's asking the question, I'm like, oh, that's what I was thinking. Like that's what I would have asked.
That's exactly the gold. Yeah. That's exactly it. When you ask the question that you're hoping the listener is also wanting you to ask, that's what I really.
But he also asks in a very coherent way. Yeah. Whereas sometimes when you're thinking about a question, you're like, how would I actually put this into words?
Yeah. And I feel like I struggle with that as well. Actually, I'm definitely like my worst self-critic. So I feel like there's room for improvement with me on that. You've also made me think of Grace Beverley, with you just saying about, interview styles having evolved. And actually, she really gives me a big confidence boost. If I listen to an interview of hers, I was actually just listening to one last night. It gives me a confidence boost to be okay with being a bit more casual and relaxed and chatty. I'm like, okay, I can definitely. So you're totally right. There's so many different styles and approaches. But let's get into the meaty stuff now, as like a reward for the listeners for like bearing with us.
I was pretty meaty in my opinion. Okay.
I'm going to get even meatier.
What's the meaty stuff?
I'm going to bring out the T-bone steak. Well, you said at the start about worst guest experiences.
Oh, worst guest experiences. Okay, I'll let you go first. I need to think about what to say. Go ahead.
Oh God, now I need to think as well. Okay, I was just too excited to hear yours. This is so funny. I loved it. It was spilling the tea now on this one. My worst guest experiences. I obviously haven't had like that bad. Like they have all been great. I would just, do you know what? I actually think it's more how some of them have behaved in the before and after.
Yeah.
It's not, the interview's totally fine. The interview's great. Like, you sit down with someone, ask them a load of great questions, hear their stories. But it's either the beforehand where they're so, maybe they're just, and I empathize, maybe they haven't really done it that much. They're nervous, but like, they ask a bunch of stuff beforehand. They want to know, like, how's it going to work? What questions, things like that. I'm like, it's fine. Like, and it's just, there's already so much to do as well. You just want to get into it. And then afterwards, I do have to share with guests. I'm like, look, this isn't going to be a back and forth with approvals on the edit or anything like that. It's not, you can't, and it's different. I don't like that at all. It's difficult for me as an ex-agency owner as well. And I guess being such a people pleaser to be like, look, I'm going to put it out there. I'm not going to get your approval from, like, I do always say, like, if there's something, if we mess up or there's something you've said, then, let me know straight away, but I'm not going to send you the cut for you to approve before it goes out there. So there have been one or two instances where we've gone through the whole editing process. It's my time and my money that I'm putting into it as well. And they've seen that and they want me to, like, tweak something or cut or edit. And it's like, not really. How about you?
I think the ones that I guess most people don't see is just guests not turning up. That is so irritating. You put in all this time and effort, like booking it, and then obviously, like, I get maybe like two to five requests a day to come on the podcast. So I turn people down, and if I've chosen you, please come on, because you're taking the space of someone else, and you're also wasting, like, time and money.
I can't believe I didn't think of that one.
That happens so, like, not so much, but it happens enough for me to be like, this is annoying.
Much more than you want it to happen.
So that's I'll tell you another one as well. I guess this might make a pretty decent clip, but I don't like getting people from The Apprentice on. Like, genuinely, I've tried so many times.
And how come? If I need to ask,
it's just for different reasons, but I don't really think they come with the sort of. And by the way, like, I haven't interviewed every single person from The Apprentice, and some of them are probably, like, very good business people, but the ones that I've got on are the ones that have some sort of a following. So maybe they were more of a personality rather than a business person. Perhaps. But I mean, the sort of guests that I've had on, the ones that I have put out there, they're still good business people. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had them on. But I had one guest where he turned up, like, late, firstly, which is, like, annoying, but whatever. We move. People are late sometimes. And he was just, like, yawning, like, during the interview, and I was like, it's like, are you okay? Like, do you want a coffee or anything? He's like, oh, sorry, man, I'm just, like, really tired. I'm like, okay.
Oh my God.
So that happened. And then, it must have happened like 3 or 4 times.
You made me think, I don't think anyone has ever that was so much as given, like, a single yawn on my show.
That wasn't great. That's
crazy.
But so that's basically it. That's what's happened. But also, I was asking him questions about The Apprentice, which is, like, the main thing that everyone knows him from. And he was like, oh, I can't really remember, to be honest. And it's like, well,
this is, like, the whole reason.
So like, can I, like, what else is there really to ask? But because I had all these questions, I was like, okay, because those are the things that would make the good clips, right? That's the things that I guess people would be curious about. Is I don't know, does it actually take you 20 minutes to get ready, or, like, what happens behind the scenes of The Apprentice?
Yeah, those
like,
details.
Does Lord Sugar come in, like, 50 times before they pick the right one? Like, all these small things.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I can't remember. So,
that's so disappointing.
So I didn't really get anything from that.
Oh, Sina, that is crazy. This has been so much fun. I definitely feel like we could go on for many more hours. Sure. It's been a real luxury to get to, share my experiences, hear about yours as well, have this kind of podcast host to podcast host kind of chinwag with each other. Final questions to leave this on. What have we not already covered that people would be interested in?
I think the best question to end on for this would be, where do you want the podcast to go?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Well, I definitely want to knock Stephen Bartlett off his pedestal, give him a run for his money. So that's my one. How about yours?
That's a good one. I think getting more sort of messages from people saying, this episode really helped me, or I really took inspiration from this. That's like those individual messages rather than the whole sort of growing it by 200% or something like that. Those individual messages hit me far greater than the trajectory.
I love that, Sina.
That's what I really like. And I do see every message. If anyone like sends me messages, I do read them all.
So sweet. I love that. I feel like my answer was such an egotistical show.
I think everyone wants us to, outperform other podcasts. That makes sense. But yeah, for me, I really like the impact side of things.
For sure. You're totally right. If I get an individual message, I'm like, oh my God, because it's fine. Because when we're doing this,
you always forget people listen.
That's what I was going to say. It's hard to, it's kind of easy to forget that we are in the ears of one particular listener.
Yeah.
And you're totally, especially with some stories where it's really like someone's gone through some really heart-wrenching stuff. I'm first of all like so grateful to the guests for sharing like some terrible stuff that they went through. For example, this woman called Melissa Chambers, just like, you couldn't make this stuff up. She went through the stuff that was like her house burnt down, her kid got diagnosed with cancer. It was just like one thing after another. The people who she'd brought into her business, they then took it over. It was just like horrific. Like, it's literally just like one thing after another. And I think it's like the way she is as well, she is a mum in real life, but she definitely gives off that really maternal, like soft maternal vibe as well. So she was like telling this horrific story, and in this way, from this lovely person, and to stuff like that, where I think when the guests are really vulnerable, they really share this horrific stuff that they've gone through. I think that really impacts certain listeners, where it's like, it's either like, okay, I'm not the only one. So I think there's so many, there can be these dark days. We were saying before about how tough entrepreneurship really is. And there can be these really dark moments. So if you're going to a podcast, if you're going somewhere, to hear that like you're not alone, there's some inspiration, you'll pull through it, someone else has been through either something similar or worse, then it, that feels nice to be able to like provide that to someone. I'm honestly just, I wanted to like backtrack on my very egotistical answer to the question. I do still want to knock Stephen Bartlett off his pedestal. So.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
All right, Sina, this has been so fun.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm glad that we've got this like shared space for this shared episode. It's very, very cool. I've never done anything like this.
Yeah,
so
me neither.
It's a very cool experience. So thank
fantastic.
you.
Now, hopefully the listeners have enjoyed it as well. Well, thank you so much for listening to this special crossover episode of
The Millennial Entrepreneur
and Strategy and Tragedy.
Thank you so much.
Take care.